Hello, everyone, and welcome to our first panel of the Innovation in Interpreting Summit. This is a very exciting one. We're talking about new developments in sign language interpreting. As you can see, we have both interpretation into international sign and live captions available for this session. The live captions are in English, so you can see them at the bottom of your screen or turn them on if you're here in Zoom to make sure you see them. I want to also welcome the people who are watching this later on, either in the Power Pack or on our YouTube channel. Before we start, I want to thank the interpreters who are with us today and the captioners. I apologize if I don't pronounce your names correctly, but we have Mark, Caroline, Sylvia, and Romy interpreting, and we have Norma and Julia doing the live English captions. An incredible team. We're delighted to have you with us. We also have a wonderful panel of speakers. Katya Fisher, Karen Green, Thiago Coimbra, and Aurelia Nana. And we are delighted you're all here. I know that was a lot of names very quickly. My apologies to the interpreters and to the captioners. And without further ado, I think I will hand it over to our chairs for this session, Maya DeWitt and Oliver Pulio. Over to you. I cannot wait to learn with you.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to this very special panel on sign language interpreting new practices. And we're absolutely delighted to be here. And thank you for Josh and Alex for hosting this. My name is Maya DeWitt. I am a sign language interpreter for quite a long time. And I wear different hats. And next to me is Oliver Pulio, my colleague. Based in France, I'm based in the Netherlands, but today is not about us, but about our colleagues. And Oliver will dive a little bit more into their backgrounds and what we're going to talk about. Before we get started, I wanted to also let you know that we have a special team of international sign interpreters with us. I was actually their mentor when they were being mentored at the European Commission, and they are now with us and providing the interpretation into international sign from French and from English. We also have our wonderful colleagues captioners and my colleague also Martine, who is providing interpretation from French to English. So we have a wonderful setting here. If you don't know how it works exactly, if you don't understand French, at the bottom in Zoom, you will see the interpretation button, which you then can click to select English, and you will hear English the whole time. The interpretation will be on screen in IS, and Oliver and I will be mostly signing this panel. So this is just an introduction in English, and from now on, we'll be mostly signing into international sign. So I think we're off to a good start. Oliver, it's on to you. Why don't you introduce what we're going to talk about?
Thank you so much, Maya. Yes, excellent. I'm really pleased that we have people joining us today. Thank you so much for being with us. I'm really excited about this. I know Maya's excited too, and we've brought a lot of things together to be able to present this today from our wonderful panel of 4 speakers, and they represent places around the globe, actually, and they bring different perspectives on sign language interpreting to us today. So that's really inspirational, I think, for us to see a great variety from our presenters. So I know we're really thrilled. Thank you, Maya, for also connecting people around the world together today and the hard work you've done to make it happen. Really appreciate it.
It was a team effort for sure.
So it was definitely great team working. Let me look at who we have with us today in turn. We have Thiago Coimbra Nogueira. Thiago is from Brazil. So he's here representing Brazil through his presentation. From the United Kingdom, we have Karen Green. So again, another great presenter, a very interesting presentation I'm looking forward to. From Germany, from Berlin, Katya Fisher, who has a great presentation to talk about working in the media. And we've seen a huge increase in the use of interpreters, sign language interpreters in the media around the world. Before we get to those speakers, I'd like to introduce our first speaker, Aurelia Nana Gasagonga. For me, that was a little bit of a mouthful. And Aurelia will be presenting to you about what she has been doing. And some of you may have seen what she's been doing on YouTube. And some of the clips that she's been putting out there recently, and some of her own thoughts about some of the responses to what's going on during this time of COVID-19 and coronavirus. And I'm really looking forward to this presentation. So I'll hand over straight away to Aurelia. Welcome.
Welcome, Aurelia.
Bonjour tout le monde. Ça se passe bien. Bonjour à tous. Donc, c'est un grand plaisir pour moi de vous présenter mon travail de communication scientifique sur YouTube. Donc, ma chaîne YouTube s'appelle La Tête Froide, une interprète français, langue des signes française, qui a la tête qui chauffe. Je me présente rapidement. Donc, je m'appelle Aurélia, je suis interprète français langue des signes française depuis 2012 et je suis dans le milieu académique de la recherche depuis 2013. Je suis ce qu'on appelle, je me considère comme une apprentie linguiste. Je vais commencer cette présentation avec 3 petites questions rhétoriques. La première question, je suppose que vous avez remarqué, depuis quelques mois, presque une année, notre vie a un peu changé en raison de ce qu'on appelle le Covid-19. Avec cela, il y a eu beaucoup d'interprètes en langue des signes à la télé, que ce soit en France ou ailleurs, et donc ça a attiré une plus grande curiosité de la part du grand public. Tout ceci s'est passé sur Internet. On était tous connectés à notre smartphone, à notre téléphone portable ou sur notre ordinateur. Et sur Internet, j'ai pu voir en tout cas plusieurs questions et qui étaient souvent reliées à un cliché, une idée reçue en lien avec soit le métier d'interprète, soit la langue des signes. Donc avec, par exemple, l'idée comme quoi la langue des signes serait universelle, ou bien l'idée que la langue des signes ne serait pas une langue, mais un langage. Ou encore, j'ai vu apparaître que l'interprète est une personne gentille par nature. Donc ça, j'étais un peu surprise. Je me dis que c'est peut-être parce qu'on travaille avec des personnes sourdes, donc forcément, on est des personnes gentilles, mais ça n'en reste pas moins un cliché. Également, que l'interprète ne travaillait que à la télé, puisque c'était là qu'il était le plus visible. Donc, ce sont 4 clichés parmi tant d'autres que j'ai choisi de vous présenter et que j'ai pu voir apparaître au cours de la dernière année. Bien entendu, ces clichés ne m'étaient pas méconnus, mais avec les réseaux sociaux et avec la crise du Covid-19, ils se sont d'autant plus répandus, ils étaient d'autant plus visibles. Du coup, j'ai décidé d'y répondre et la réponse est passée sur Internet également. Mais j'ai choisi le média YouTube pour cela. Donc, j'ai choisi d'y répondre sous forme de petites capsules vidéo YouTube avec 2 rubriques. La première rubrique que j'ai intitulée « La question entendante ». C'est toutes les questions entendues par des personnes que des personnes entendantes m'ont posées. Ces questions-là, on me les a jamais posées par des personnes sourdes, en tout cas. Donc, j'ai appelé cette petite rubrique la question entendante et une autre rubrique décryptage où là, on va un peu plus en profondeur et j'essaye de donner un peu plus de contenu scientifique, linguistique ou mettre la question avec une perspective plus sociétale. Donc, je me suis amusée pendant cette période de confinement en reprenant vraiment les codes de YouTube, mais en gardant le fond et le sérieux du message avec un discours qui est quand même basé sur mon expérience en tant qu'interprète et sur mon expérience en tant qu'apprenti chercheur en donnant du contenu scientifique. Donc, j'ai repris les codes de YouTube avec des images flashy, ma tête en image également avec une émotion particulière pour donner aux gens envie de cliquer. J'essaye également de faire toujours une référence scientifique, bien entendu, mais une référence culturelle. Par exemple, une de mes premières vidéos, c'était Squeezie, le premier youtubeur français. Donc, il est suivi par 15 millions de personnes. Et donc, dans une de ses vidéos, il avait fait le lapsus en disant langage des signes au lieu de langue des signes. Donc, du coup, j'ai repris la tête de Squeezie, j'ai mis ma tête à côté et j'ai expliqué pourquoi on ne disait pas langage des signes, mais plutôt langue des signes. J'ai également fait une vidéo autour de la terminologie de langue des signes avec un animateur français très connu qui s'appelle Mouloud Achour. Donc, c'est la deuxième image. Et la troisième image, j'ai repris un animateur également très connu en France qui a bercé l'enfance de plusieurs de Français, dans la mienne, qui est un scientifique et qui vulgarise aussi du contenu scientifique sur Internet. Donc, c'était un discours plutôt étayé avec des arguments et moi, j'ai proposé d'en apporter d'autres pour dire que pas forcément besoin de dire sourd-muet, mais on peut dire sourd tout court. Donc, tout simplement, la meilleure façon de vous montrer un peu mon travail de déconstruction de toutes ces idées reçues autour de l'interprétation en langue des signes, donc langue des signes, interprétation, communauté sourde, c'est de vous montrer un petit extrait vidéo. Donc, cet extrait, donc je parle en français et c'est sous-titré en anglais. Donc, je vous laisse regarder ce petit extrait.
YouTube, tu m'entends? Coucou cher entendant! Ah, visiblement tu ne savais pas toi que le monde était divisé en deux parties. D'un côté les sourds, de l'autre les entendants, ceux qui n'entendent pas, ceux qui entendent. Et toi, si tu m'écoutes, je suppose que tu fais partie de la team entendante, comme moi. Welcome! À la différence que moi, au quotidien, je jongle entre ces deux parties. Mon taf, c'est de faire passer la communication. Et oui, je suis interprète français, langue des signes française. Je me présente, je m'appelle Aurelia et je suis interprète depuis 2012. Sur cette chaîne, je te propose de t'emmener avec moi dans les coulisses du métier d'interprète afin de déconstruire un à un différents clichés. Du coup, Aurelia, tu ne travailles que à la télé. Mais tu veux faire ça à ton plein d'interprétation et tu es payé. Est-ce qu'on peut faire regarder si est-ce qu'on peut regarder si Oh! Le principe c'est de garder la tête froide. Cher entendant, si tu penses que la langue des signes est universelle, que des sourds sont muets, voire pourquoi pas que la Terre est carrée, tu es au bon endroit. Je te propose donc deux émissions, genre la meuf elle s'est trop crue à la télé quoi. Je te propose donc deux playlists. La première playlist, la question entendante, sur toutes les questions qu'on me pose à chaque fois vis-à-vis du métier. D'ailleurs, si tu as une question entendante, je t'invite à me le mettre en commentaire. Et une deuxième playlist décryptage sur un sujet qui fait l'actualité autour du métier. Je te donne donc rendez-vous en playlist et d'ici là, tu gardes la tête froide.
Voilà, donc tout simplement, c'était un petit extrait de ce que je propose sur YouTube. C'est un peu le menu. Pardon, j'allais partir en anglais. Donc, je vais terminer avec ma petite citation, un petit proverbe que j'aime bien dire aux personnes qui ont envie de suivre et de découvrir un peu plus le métier d'interprète en langue des signes. Tu n'es qu'à une question de ta réponse. C'est-à-dire, il n'y a pas de question bête. Et souvent, on pense quelque chose, on imagine quelque chose, alors que la façon la plus simple d'avoir une réponse claire et nette, c'est de poser la question. Donc, bien entendu, je vous invite à ne pas hésiter à me poser vos questions entendantes, que ce soit en commentaire sur ma chaîne YouTube ou bien sur mes réseaux sociaux, Instagram, Twitter et bien YouTube. C'est le même nom partout, c'est La Tête Froide. Et donc, voilà, n'hésitez pas. Et donc, je vous remercie grandement pour votre écoute. Et je voudrais terminer, bien entendu, en remerciant mon université, Radboud University, qui me soutient dans ce travail de communication scientifique. Également, je remercie bien entendu ma famille et mes amis pour tout leur feedback. Mes amis, dont Sylvia, qui est en train d'interpréter du français vers les signes internationaux. Donc, merci Sylvia particulièrement. Et je remercie également, bien entendu, toutes les personnes qui me suivent sur les réseaux sociaux, qui mettent un petit like, un petit commentaire. C'est très encourageant. Ça permet de continuer. Mes collègues également, ma communauté de travail. Bien entendu, les sourds avec qui j'ai grand plaisir à travailler, les entendants pour toutes vos questions. Et un petit peu le Covid, parce que c'est grâce à lui que je me suis lancée. Merci pour votre écoute.
Thank you, thank you. Thank you so much, Aurelia, for your presentation. I'm so sorry that I had to interrupt it, but you did such a fantastic job. So I think what I will do now is kindly ask the next participant our next speaker to come on screen. Our next presenter is from Brazil, and his name is Thiago Coimbra. He is incredibly well-versed on the situation in Brazil and works with many interpreters and has created a team of interpreters to create better practice. So I will now hand over to Thiago, but just before I do, as you saw recently, we had some problems with the YouTube streaming and shared screens. So we've made an executive decision not to share screens anymore. So what we kindly ask you to do is look at your presentation on your side, and we won't share, but what we will do is we will send the presentations after the fact to those email addresses that we have, just to give best accessible services possible. So over to you, Thiago. Good luck.
Thank you, Maya. Thank you very much for your introduction. I'm really delighted to be here with you today to share what I've learned and hopefully encourage a discussion. I'd also like to thank Mark for interpreting here today. Thank you. So yeah, I've been introduced as a Brazilian. I am indeed from somewhere around sort of halfway down the coast there in Brazil, in Rio Grande do Sul. So I'm an educator. I have a position at the university there and run education programs for interpreters. The thing that I have focused on the most is conference interpreting. That is my sort of major discipline. And as we know, we were faced with a dilemma. As soon as COVID hit the world, things changed fast. And for interpreters, we were left thinking, how are we going to proceed in this very changed dynamic? And we had lots of questions about how to do it. Now, I think we were no different to anyone else. Suddenly faced with these changes, it was time to respond quickly and make changes ourselves. So when this happened, and it happened fast, I looked around my own house and thought, well, what do I do here? How do I make things right to work from home now? I'm living here with my family. I need to think about making sure I have a space which is just professional and used by me. I need to pick a designated space. I had a number of ideas about how to do this, and I talked to my interpreter colleagues about the things I was thinking, and we shared our ideas around innovative ways of dealing with this. We put together a collection of our ideas to document ways that we could now work from home. So all the ideas that we put together, we presented to the association in Brazil, the Federal Association for Translators and Interpreters, who accepted this document to become a standard. So these guidelines helped us know, how are we now going to do this from home? And it covered things such as lighting, positioning, setting up the camera, the background, also team working. How are we going to remotely work as a team? So what I'd like to do now is talk through 4 of our ideas that may help all of you thinking about home working as sign language interpreters now, based on my practice and those discussions with the colleagues. So it's really important to have a plain colored background, as you can see here, with no other interruptions. You need to make sure you're framed appropriately so that the wall against your working like me is wide enough. We also were thinking about lighting. This is so important because spoken language interpreters may not consider this so much. They're very focused on the audio. For us, we must be seen. So lighting is a big consideration. So I would suggest having 1 light in front of you. Even better is to have 2 lights from the side. That's really important. As well as that, when I had to set up my camera initially, I didn't have a tripod to put the camera on. I was literally taking books off the shelf to make a stand on which I could put my camera, right? Really improvising. So what I'd like to do is just show you a picture quickly. It'll only take a moment to show you, then I'll take it off screen again. Okay, so there we've got the before and after, yeah? Okay, so one of the things that we needed to think about was how in a domestic space I could learn about all these very necessary technical things to help me do my work. My team that I needed to talk to shared lots of questions and answers around how we could develop best practice. Yeah, and we know a lot more now than we did then. So two things I'd like to share with you now. One of them that's really important is to use word clouds. When you're preparing as a team, it's really important that you can use applications on the web where you generate all these ideas that come from other ideas, yeah, to support your practice. Just one word that's your key word, and then thinking around it and expanding your thoughts around that to support your interpretation, yeah? The second thing, and again, I'm sure some of you will have come across this in your own studies, is the use of mind maps. So again, making connections between words, between concepts, the things that will support you in your assignment work. So sharing these in colleagues is really useful. And there isn't one platform that does this for everybody. There's a number of options you can choose from. So there are some suggestions I have around where you can look to find some of these platforms. So one of the things to do is to think about, who is the deaf client going to be? What is it that we as interpreters need to prepare for? Yeah, and finding out to see if we can find resources about the people we work for to support us in preparing for our work. And this also makes sure that these platforms are accessible to them. So here on this slide, you can see what I've got here are some illustrations of how to do that. Okay. So the important thing here, this is my fourth suggestion here, is that if you're a team member, you have to talk to each other. And how does that happen? What happens if there's a technical problem whilst you're online, and how do you get support? How do you swap between you as a team? One way to do that is to use a telephone, so that as well as your remote interpreting platform, you have a separate device on which you're communicating with your team. That's one way to do it, so you can ask for support if you run into any issues. The other way to do it is just relying on a single computer with a single screen. Split the screen and share it so that you have a support channel on part of the screen and then your interpreting platform on the other part of the screen. It's possible to use both. It may be that the second option is perhaps better, but these are available to us as support platforms. I mean, interestingly, in the work I've now done for this last year, things are already very different, yeah? The work I was doing at home and comparing it with the work I was doing out there in the world, I think the important thing is to think that in the team, we're still communicating, we're still sharing. This is ongoing work, right? And that's really broadened our sort of scope of practice, actually. And the innovation that I've been talking about is very present. So I'd like to thank you all. Thank you for paying attention to my presentation. I'm sorry that I wasn't able to show you some of the things that I had, but I know, understand exactly why. And I just wanted to thank Maya and Oliver both, and also Mark for the team working today. Thank you very much. Thank you so much, Thiago. That was really great to cover those really 4 important things on which you gave people some really good tips. And I think for people watching today, that's really useful and will be of great benefit to them now. So thank you so much, Thiago. Now what I'd like to do is move on to the next thing. Now, hang on a minute, because I'm just going to change language before I introduce the next speaker.
So our next presenter, I'm very excited to present Karen Green from the UK, who is going to be explaining a little bit more about how the change to remote needs a more systematic adjustment so that we can look at our quality in a different way. Over to you, Karen.
Thank you. So I'm coming from the perspective of running a company that books sign language interpreters for various clients of ours, and what we did at the beginning of lockdown and how that's changed, or not just lockdown, but through the pandemic, and how that has changed over time. So for those of us in the UK, our lives changed quite dramatically on the 23rd of March in 2020, and our work changed suddenly overnight as well. So on the run up to that, I realised that something large was going to be happening, and I got in contact with an experienced interpreter, Sherrod Rowan, and Interpreting Matters commissioned him to do some work for us. So we set up some training sessions that we provided free to interpreters. Sherrod did a fully accessible video that we put on our website so that anybody could access that video. And it was all about how to set up to work from home and how to be able to provide a good service working from home. And from those workshops, we got a lot of interest, and we did some smaller workshops online that was for a small fee to give interpreters more of an individual feedback. We're now nearly a year on, and we still need to make sure that our working remotely is still truly accessible for our clients. We wouldn't go to a job on a face-to-face on venue booking and stand somewhere where our deaf clients can't see us, and we wouldn't not use a microphone so our hearing clients couldn't hear us. So we need to be looking at how we set ourselves up working remotely from home so that we can provide a truly professional and accessible service. So what Interpreting Matters started to do was, I realised probably about 6 months into the pandemic that there was a huge variety of setups that interpreters were having from home. At the beginning of the pandemic, we had to cobble together what we had at home. It was increasingly difficult to order webcams, to have headsets. But as time went on, these became more readily available and the prices started to come down, because of course at the beginning the prices rocketed and they became very difficult to get hold of. So I realised that we needed to do something to try and increase the standard of platform interpreting. So I'm talking specifically about our platform interpreting that we do, so conference style interpreting, webinars that go live streamed. So I'm not talking about the more community based, maybe one-to-one individual access to work bookings that interpreters out there might have on a regular basis. So I realised there was some common errors that were occurring with people's setups. So what I looked into was having some support. I realised that my knowledge wasn't enough on my own, so I contacted Sherritt again to see if he would be willing to come on board, and I contacted Mark Schofield, who is another experienced interpreter. And between the three of us, Interpreting Matters commissioned them to assist me with what I was doing. And between the three of us, we've been working on what we can do and how we can improve standards for the conference style interpreting. So we realised that there was some main issues that were coming up. So there was lighting. That affects everything else. So if you don't have good lighting, it affects your video quality, and it affects then the quality of the people that the interpreting service that's being provided. Internet speeds. That's really important, not just the speeds that you have, but how you connect to your router. So we're recommending that interpreters connect with Ethernet cable or have a mesh Wi-Fi, and don't rely on normal Wi-Fi connections. Backdrops, that's already been touched on as well. So having a backdrop that's plain, having your backdrop that's within frame. So you use the zoom function on your camera to zoom in. I've seen quite a lot out there that they have a backdrop, and people are using a backdrop, but there's been no zooming in. So you can still see the room around the sides of the backdrop. The camera as well that's being used, it's important to use an external camera because they are a better quality than inbuilt cameras. Having your auto settings off so that your camera isn't constantly zooming, isn't focusing in and out as you're moving your hands when you interpret. And then the final thing we were realising was clothing. So today I'm wearing pretty dark clothing with a dark background, so probably not ideal for interpreting. So we're recommending to have a mid-tone clothing. So what we did was, between the three of us, we were looking at these things. So now Interpreting Matters requires interpreters, if they're coming forward for conference work, to provide us with a recording of themselves for both signing and using speech, so we can check both the audio and the visual elements. And we've devised a form so that we can provide very focused feedback. So it doesn't matter which one of the three of us is looking at the video. We've got the form that we complete, and we send that to the interpreter. The other thing that I'm doing is I'm trialing using Microsoft Teams as a platform to encourage discussion between interpreters that are coming forward for platform conference style work. So within that, I'm hoping to encourage some tech talk, maybe some new technology that people have had, or some problems that they're having, to ask, to see if anybody can advise them on how to overcome those. And then within those teams, I can set up, for those of you that know about Microsoft Teams, you can set up then individual channels that will be for bookings and specific jobs. So within that, I can drop all the preparation materials. Discussion can happen between the interpreters before the job happens. It can be an on-the-job place for support. At the click of a button, you can connect to your colleagues visually, and you can have a chat function there. So that's something that we're trialing. And within all of this, I am very aware that even though the profession itself is very female heavy, so there's a lot more female interpreters within the profession, but when you go up the ladder of perceived hierarchy of the jobs, it becomes more male heavy. So within all of this that we're trying to do, I am going to be doing my best to increase the amount of female interpreters that are working in the higher profile jobs, interpreters of colour, and also deaf interpreters. We've been using deaf interpreters for probably 5 or 6 years now at conferences, using live captioning to work from, and it works really well. There are deaf interpreters out there that are very, very capable of the job, but I feel they've been pigeonholed into certain types of interpreting, and it's been very difficult for them to break through that glass ceiling. So we're doing all we can to support those interpreters to become valued members of an interpreting team. So that's it from me. I know our slides are going to be shared with you, so you can see the slides, and there's contact information on the slides if anybody wants to contact me and ask any more questions. Thank you.
And thank you, Karen, so much. You did so much in such a short space of time. And I think you gave a very wonderful and different perspective that helps our audience reflect more on their own home setup to see how they can make technical adjustments for best practice. We will have questions for you later on, Karen. Thank you again. So I will now introduce our next presenter, our fourth presenter for today. Her name is Katya Fisher, and she hails from Berlin, Germany. She's got extensive experience as an interpreter, a certified deaf interpreter. But as coronavirus took off and media became more and more important, we'll be hearing her perspective and how work developed. So please, Katya. Thank you, Maya. Hello, everybody. So today I'm going to talk about interpreting at press conferences and its technical side, particularly coming from my experiences. Just wanted to make sure my camera angle was as good as it could be. So we've already had 3 presenters already who've really focused on the pandemic and the adjustments they had to make to their technical setup. I'm going to be coming from a different perspective as a certified deaf interpreter in Germany. So as it stands, there are deaf interpreters and there is training for technical setup, particularly for media and broadcasting. So we have been trained on how to ensure best practice to work in remote/studio settings. And we've trained and practiced to become professionals in that arena. And that is something I completed, 10 years ago now. But with coronavirus and the health pandemic, deaf interpreters, not so experienced with Zoom, were more experienced with professional studio setup. This is something that they had been investing in for a significant amount of time. And this is not just me in Berlin, it's many deaf interpreters across Germany who have professional home studio setups as opposed to Zoom semi-professional setups. I did have a lot more illustrations in my PowerPoint presentation that unfortunately I can't show you, but I will highlight them as best as possible. There are 3 different processes of interpreting and with their own technical expertise associated. The first one is translation, which is where you are given your material. Maybe it is a video clip and you've been given a caption file with that video clip. This could be in advance of a press conference, for example. So it's not live. This is a video they are preparing for a press conference. You've got time to work with the team on this text and ensure that you do the best translation you can. Then you film it, edit it, and send it back for their press conference release. So in that context, you have a lot of time to prepare. You have a film clip that you can spend 2 to 5 days, depending how much time they give you, but 2 to 5 days is quite average to play with it, work with it, translate it, and send it on. The second form of work I do is interpreting on TV. So this is something I've been working on for the past 2 years. Now, we've got 2 broadcasting units, main broadcasting units in Germany. One is ARD and the other one is ZDF or ZDF. Now, ZDF is who I work with quite a lot, and they've been focusing on the press conferences throughout the health pandemic. And as press conferences became more and more frequent, they took responsibility to ensure accessibility for this. So we had to have much more add-ons to our technical studio to ensure the best product humanly possible. Now, of course, budget is always an issue. So it was challenging to build up the technical supply, but I'll just give you a bit of an example here. I hope you can see that there on screen. So you could see that in the usual studios, you've got those people sitting behind desks reading from a newspaper or reading from text. What they do is they record that and they give that to us as the interpreting team, with less time in advance. We look over it, we reflect on the content, and we figure out how best we are going to work this into sign language to ensure accessibility for the deaf community. Now, this is something we do and reflect, but when it comes to recording, we do it live. There's no possibility with translation. You have the option to go back. Oh, I made a kerfuffle. Let me start that again. With live interpreting, that's not possible. But we do have the materials in advance to give us the best product possible. And for both these first two that I have mentioned, we are in studio, our home, in our professional studios that are very technically set up. Now, we are quite particular about how they have to be. So lighting is quite key, as we've heard other people mention. And we have to ensure that we've got very good captioners, teleprompters who are very good at what they do. Because what happens is we have our teleprompter just under the camera lens so that we can read and translate at the same time. Now, this isn't artificial intelligence. This is human velotypists who are working from the spoken language into written language. Alternative to the velotypist or speech to text, we can have an interpreter that I would be watching. And then I would be watching that interpreter who would be screened or filmed, recorded to the screen under camera so I could see them and work to camera. So these, we always ensure that these modes of information are just below the camera or as close as possible for good eye contact. So it looks good to the audience and looks natural. Then I said there were three I wanted to talk about. The final thing I wanted to talk about is interpreting live at press conferences, but live streaming. So as we know, Chancellor Merkel frequently gives updates to the situation of COVID in Germany. And instead of working from our studios, we actually move and go to where they are filming from, whether that is government buildings or official offices. We go there. I know in the USA, we frequently see the government representative speaking on a podium with the interpreter close to them, 2 meters, of course, but they're on stage with the speaker. This is something we did at the beginning of the pandemic back last year in March and April. It has its pros and its cons, but in Germany, we've kind of shifted away from this practice. I'm just collecting my thoughts. Yes. So when we are on site, we have interpreters on site as well. We have technicians who create a temporary studio on site, separate from where the stage is. And that is specifically for us as interpreters. Now, remember, I mentioned the first two methods of working, we have a very high quality professional setup. This third one, we're doing live web streaming. It's a portable tech setup, so it's not as highly equipped as the studios we usually work from. It tends to be bare minimum. We have our camera, and we don't have a teleprompter in this case. We actually have a second monitor somewhere approximately close to the camera, or an interpreter, depending on the day. So what you can often see on live streaming is that the eye gaze isn't straight into camera. It's just a tad off. And I think this is something we need to improve upon for further best practice. I just want to check that I've got everything. Yes, so this is the mobile studio I was mentioning. And this is what I was talking about, the screen teleprompter. So this tends to hold the script that they're going to use. And honestly, this teleprompter is the best for me as a deaf interpreter for working. So as I said, when you're working on TV in a live stream setting, if you're on site, I think it works better if you aren't next. We've seen frequently in the US that they're next to each other on stage. However, in Germany, they have a plethora of options to work from. They could have Chancellor Merkel reading her speech or her text without any interpretation, but equally they have the option to impose the interpreter in a corner somewhere. And this is this picture-in-picture can be selective depending on how broadcasters want the information, how far throughout Germany they want the information to go, and what their intended use is. Unfortunately, it can be very challenging to get the information out to the deaf community live because, as you know, there's a lot of delays when it comes to government trying to set up these press conferences, and they're having discussions last minute just before. So times often vary, which is why they tend to superimpose the interpreter after the fact. Now, COVID came as a surprise to everyone. So we had teething problems and we are learning as we go. We have come a long way, but we've got further to go. When we talk about the first two categories, we have the technical equipment to do what we need to do, but we can definitely do more. And I could go on and on, but I think I'll call it there. I'm sorry I couldn't show you my PowerPoint, but thank you very much for your time and attention. Maya saying, wow, thank you so much. You packed so much information into that presentation. As we know, this is being recorded. So after the fact, people can watch it again and pick up more nuances and more tips from that. So we have some questions for you, if you don't mind. You're coming from a German perspective. And I know that just when Corona took over the world and made it a very different place, just before that, you were lobbying to have interpreters on stage or on situ with Chancellor Merkel. In advance of COVID, that wasn't the case. Am I right in saying that? So how did that lobbying go in advance of coronavirus? And then coronavirus happened and suddenly everything changed. Could you give us more of an insight to pre and during coronavirus situation for deaf interpreting? And the size of the window in which interpreters were put as well. Sure, I'll just show you. So if we take a look here, we've got these differences that Maya was mentioning. So it's a really good question. When they decided to bring on interpreters, the Deaf Association in Germany really lobbied hard for access during this pandemic, which is the first time we had ever seen anything of this caliber before. Very early on, it was decided that interpreters wouldn't be on stage with Chancellor Merkel or anyone else. And they did do this picture-in-picture. But like I said, there was teething problems because it started out too small. And the deaf community and the Deaf Association, we would often tell them, okay, take a look and see what you think. And they would lobby to make it better. And at the beginning, a lot of the deaf community were very unhappy and almost needed binoculars to be able to see the sign language interpretation. So now what we're seeing is the main room smaller with myself superimposed, me or my team. I'll just show. And then there is a button on the remote where you can decide to have the interpreter on or off. So that's something we lobbied hard for. And that really works well for the older deaf people. But unfortunately, many of them don't have that new age technology where you can turn the interpreter on and off. So comes with pros and cons again. I know Oliver has another question for one of our other panelists, so I'll just hand it over to him.
Yes, thank you. I do actually. The question I have for Thiago. Yeah, Thiago, we have a question from June Wong. And June Wong has asked a question for you around how sign language interpreters are working together but working remotely, and how they're doing that as a team when they're in two different locations. So how does that work? You know, how are people experiencing this? Can you say a bit more about that? Yeah, thank you very much, June, for that question. So for me, I'd like to illustrate that. Just a moment, I'll show you. Okay. Okay, good. Just take a look at what's there on the slide. Okay, I'll take that off. Okay, so if you took a look at the picture, that shows you how we've done things, whereby you need to consider how you can have a dialogue about working together, okay? And what you need to do is really think about how you're going to take steps in advance for this, right? So as I just showed you on the screen, there was a phone just to the side of it. And that's the phone I'm talking to my coworker on, or coworkers. And I'm using an audio headset with my phone on a call directly to my team as a support line. But what you see on the interpreting platform is just me to camera. And I'm using obviously an audio feed from that platform for my source spoken message, right, to interpret into sign. Also, the useful thing about having a separate support channel, if it's that phone, is if something goes wrong on the main platform, you have backup you can call on that isn't going to fail at the same time, okay, because the phone's a separate device. So that's one way that you can do that. So having those conversations as a team, making plans for how you'll support each other are really important. And making sure you just have open and full discussions are really vital, and planning in advance. You need to consider a whole lot of criteria about how's this going to go, what do we expect, and then you can start interpreting. But before that, you need to have all these conversations. But I found that by doing it that way, things go really well. So thanks for the question.
And we have another question for Karen Green, actually. Brilliant. Thank you for coming on camera, Karen. So we've been watching and we've been having a couple of considerations. We have two questions for you all in all. So the first, you were talking about this form, and in a conference setting, when interpreters work in conference settings, particularly, that's when you use the form. But what I wanted to know is, why don't you use it in community settings or alternative situations, or if you do? The other thing I wanted to ask, sorry, Oliver, maybe you can help me. I've forgotten what my second question was going to be. Actually, maybe Karen, if you wouldn't mind answering the question I've asked so far while we just try to remember the second.
Sure. The reason, the reason that we're checking people's setup for the conference type bookings is that there's likely to be a larger variety of deaf people watching and needing the interpreters, or hearing people needing the spoken interpretation. So we need to try for it to be as good as possible for anybody to access it. Whereas support, so access to work, so individual support for deaf people, it's likely that deaf people that are using their interpreters have a preference maybe for the type of background, colours that are being used, type of clothing, cover clothing. So that is very much more individual, and interpreters are likely to be building that their setup up around the type of people that they have those one-to-one individual bookings with.
And just as you said that, the second question I had for you came to my mind, trying desperately to keep it in my brain. So when you're going through that checklist, if someone sends you that video and you're cross-checking it against your forms, there are three of you involved, right? So what if there's something what is the thing throughout the work the three of you have done when you've seen these sample videos? What's one thing that constantly you see time and time and time again? Is there one specific tip you would like to give all interpreters who are watching from this work that you've done to date?
Switch off your auto settings. So you can control your lightness, your contrasts, your focus. Otherwise, your cameras are going to be constantly changing those. And for us, maybe just watching isn't that big a deal. We might not even notice it as hearing people watching a webinar if people's focus is going in and out. But for a deaf person that has to concentrate on those interpreters for the duration of that event, it becomes exhausting when the interpreter's camera is constantly changing focus, or the settings are constantly changing the brightness or the contrast of the picture. So switch off those settings and learn how to use your equipment.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. Oliver, did you have a question for Aurelia?
Yes, I do. And thank you. I do have a question for Aurelia, actually. I had a lot of questions, the same question from many people, actually. And it's about you having made your Sign Language 101 videos. And obviously now you have a lot of attention for what you've done. But what about plans for other topics? I know that you've put some English captions on there now. It was nice to see those. That's great. So you're reaching a wider audience. So what next? What are your plans?
Yeah, so thank you for your question. Sorry, I will speak French. Merci pour ta question. Donc oui, en fait, je commence vraiment petit. Moi, ce que j'aimerais dans l'idéal, c'est aller beaucoup plus en profondeur et parler beaucoup plus du processus d'interprétation et quels sont les besoins de l'interprète quand il est chez le client, besoins logistiques, besoins d'organisation, par exemple, envoyer les éléments de préparation pour qu'on puisse fournir une prestation de qualité. Également parler également de comment ça se passe dans la tête quand on est interprète, puisque c'est pour ça que j'ai intitulé ma chaîne YouTube Une interprète qui a la tête qui chauffe, parce qu'en fait on peut croire que passer d'une langue à une autre ça se fait comme ça en 2-2, alors qu'en fait pas du tout. Il y a tout un processus et tellement de décisions qui sont prises à la fois dans la tête, et donc des fois moi je sais qu'à la fin de la journée j'ai la tête vraiment qui chauffe, qui va exploser, et je dois vraiment essayer de me calmer pour faire redescendre tout ça. Donc, au départ, je suis obligée de poser les bases et les clichés, les idées reçues les plus répandues avant d'aller plus en profondeur. Et je continue à ajouter au fur et à mesure les sous-titres en anglais pour que ce soit diffusé de plus en plus. Donc, j'ai déjà commencé et ça va venir encore plus avec des sous-titres en anglais. Donc, voilà pour mes projets et les perspectives.
Thank you so much, Aurelia. I do have another question, actually. It could be for everybody. If we could just answer briefly, that would be great. So anybody, please feel free to answer the question. And the question is, how would it work for sign language interpreters to work with spoken language interpreters who are in a booth? How do they work together? Do we have any tips, or do you know of any particular problems that come up, and how to make that as best as it can be? So feel free, any of our panelists.
If you don't mind, I wouldn't mind answering that. So it's interesting you mention it, because at the press conference, we have other languages interpreted, whether that be to English or to French. So far, we've been working very independently of each other, not much communication between our respective modality and languages, and that has led to problems, whether it's audio not sounding good on TV and suddenly we can't work as a team because of that mishap. Really, the best way to work is always as a team, irregardless of language. It's that we respect each other and communicate with each other so that we know how best to work as a team, as a larger spoken and sign language team. So that's what I'd like to contribute from my experience.
That's great, Katya. Does anyone have something to add from the panel, or even Maya? Is there one more question that you could ask that we have from YouTube?
Let me just check between the platforms.
If you'd like me to.
There's one from YouTube that's asking us as hosts, as well as all panelists, which is the best platform for interpreting in terms of screen size and accessibility of sign language. So let's pose that to our panelists. Maybe they know. Thiago, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, thank you. In Brazil, there are all sorts of different platforms that have popped up, okay, that we can use for interpreting. I think probably the one that is maybe optimal that I'm seeing is StreamYard. StreamYard. Yeah. So StreamYard is really good for framing the interpreter, the size of the interpreter there. And I see that when things are streamed on YouTube, both deaf people and hearing people seem to appreciate when that platform is the one that's used. It seems to give good access all round. So that's the one.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Thiago. I do see another question. I believe it's for Katya. She wouldn't mind coming on screen. So the question posed to you, I see that it says, it's a question from the community to you, Katya. So when you are working live, do you prefer signed content or text or captions? Which is your preferred method of working? I really prefer working from the teleprompter. I can quickly get a full phrase, a full concept, and be able to manage the content myself autonomously that way. Interpreters always have their own internal strategies that they're working when they're bringing information from one language to another that I then have to manage and cater on my own side. Where with teleprompting, for me personally, it gives me the autonomy to make my own strategies and not rely on someone else's. But we're not homogenous as a group. All deaf interpreters like to work differently. That's just my preferred. And Maya is just saying, in line with that question, when you're working from teleprompting, you work from it live. Is that correct? Katya's saying yes. And Maya's asking, do you find there are any errors? I see when it's live and it's quick, there can be errors coming up, right? Katya's saying yes. So when I was working live, they had booked me. I needed to get a teleprompter, but it's not a large group that I can work from. In fact, there are two preferred I work with in that they are fast, they are able to keep pace, and they give very good product. Unfortunately, not all teleprompters have the ability to do that in live time with accuracy. Wow, thank you.
Amazing. Thank you. And it's unfortunately time for me to tell everybody that we're out of time. I'm so sorry. We do actually have another panel beginning really soon. So I think it's important that people just need to take a little moment, a little breathing space, maybe some refreshments before they join the next panel, which will again be another great panel as part of this summit. So from me personally today, I just wanted to thank all our 4 panelists. They've been amazing. I wanted to thank our interpreting team. I wanted to thank Josh and Alex, who are organizing this event and for inviting us to be part of it. They've done great stuff. I want to thank Maya as well. It's been wonderful to collaborate on this. And I want to thank all of you for watching as well. Thank you very much. Thank you for your questions, the comments in the chat. It's been really wonderful. So I hope I'm going to see you all soon.
Thank you so, so much. And maybe if we can get all the interpreters on screen so you could see who the faces are behind the voices, it'd be great to see the captioners, our spoken language interpreters, everyone.
I was just going to say it's so wonderful. It's been so fantastic to have all of you here. Thank you so, so much to everyone joining us for this panel. So I do want to make sure I get the shout outs right. So thanks to Maya and Oliver, first of all, for chairing and for being so generous with your time. Thanks to Katya, Karen, Thiago, and Aurelia as panelists. A big shout out, of course, to our interpreters, Mark, Caroline, Sylvia, Romy and Martine, and to our 2 captioners, Norma and Julia. So just very, very briefly, because we have to hop over to the next panel. The panel is already stomping at the bit. But I wanted to let you know that we still have today's student scholarship winner to be announced at the next panel. It's not too late to apply. So you can go to that TFW Rocks /student scholarship. Josh's going to post the links in the chat. We also still have the team challenge ongoing with our bingo, so make sure to check that out. And you can also still apply for our summit scholarship. All the information is going to be in the links, and you can, of course, find it in our community and our website. So I guess see you in just a few minutes in the next remote panel if you're joining us for that. And a big, big thank you to everyone making this panel possible tonight. Take care, everyone. and good night or goodbye.